Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. My name is Sloane Freemont, and I'm your host. This week, I'm welcoming back one of our regular guests and one of my favorite guests, Dr. Erhard Vogel, for another amazing conversation. And I think you're really going to like this topic this week because we're talking about creating what we speak, the title of the show. But before we get into that, I want to share just a little bit about Dr. Vogel. If you're new to him, if you haven't listened to any of our past conversations, Erhard is recognized as one of the foremost meditation and self-realization teachers in the world. He is the founder of the Nataraja Yoga Ashram in San Diego. Erhard's teachings are a unique combination of time-tested wisdom and pragmatic method. His fundamental, experiential, and systematic approach is based upon sound, psychological, physiological, and spiritual principles that make meditation and self-realization practical and attainable. And I think if you've listened to any of our previous episodes, you can probably recognize that in what we talk about on here and the way Erhard, in what Erhard shares with us. He teaches not from books or other people's ideas, but from his own profound life and experience. And his most recent book is called A Dialogue with Death, The Teacher of Life, an ancient story for the modern world. Erhard, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, Sloane.
So I want to start off the show today asking the listeners some questions. And we talk a lot, we've talked in our previous interviews about experiencing, what it means to actually experience something. And so I want to put this challenge to the listeners before we start our episode today, how you can actually, if you would actually like to experience this conversation, right? And would you like to be engaged in a process that will give you the tools, the understanding, and the way, almost a way of life to respond to the signals you get internally in your own system. And so I want to start out putting that challenge out today to the listeners. Erhard, what would you like to add to that?
Well, when you talk about being engaged, right? It depends on which level you want to be engaged.
Right.
The one level is, I guess the most superficial I can think of right now is where you are listening to the words, to what is being discussed, and it's going into your ears, into one ear and out the other, as we say, right? So it's just an auditory event that took place. The next is to let it go into your ears and from there to your mind.
Mm-hmm.
But then the mind can be part of the listening process and really not even absorb it.
Mm-hmm.
It just becomes part of the clutter of noises that the mind has taken in, right? So then the next step would be for the mind to register it. But that's still not enough. Next is to register it and bring it to you, the listener, who is present to her or himself.
Right.
Do you see what I mean by that?
I do.
So that way then, and then the next step is not just keep it in the mental level, but in your core, in your being, experience it.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about, you're not only getting the words or their meanings even, but experiencing what that is like. Right now you could experience what it is like to listen and hear and absorb and experience.
Right.
How do you do that? Well, you have to be focused with you in your center, with the idea of you, the conscious being the recipient.
Yes. And I've often said during our conversations that when I am experiencing these conversations, I feel it internally. Sometimes I felt a release, like in my stomach area. Sometimes I felt like my shoulders relaxed. Sometimes I felt it in my head. Sometimes I've even felt it after our conversations. So experiencing is so much more than listening mindlessly as you're doing something else. It's a completely different way of experiencing something.
Or even listening mindfully.
Mm-hmm.
You see,
Yeah.
this is the thing is mindfulness is not enough yet.
Yeah.
You want to go have what the mind absorbs, then the mind needs to relate that to the being who owns the mind.
Yes. Yes. And I remember when we had our first conversation and you talked about that, about that's your, when you're teaching, that's what you tell your students. You don't want them to just take your word for it, right? You want them to experience it. And
Right.
over these conversations, my understanding of experiencing something has grown. It's changed. And I'm hoping the listeners are feeling the same thing with these conversations. And using the word mindful or mindfulness, right? That's a common term in the, let's say, like the yoga space or some of
Well,
the.
that's become common in the last few years,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's the name for methodology, but it's uh, it's usually considered mindful meditation, which is almost an oxymoron because as long as the mind is full and doing the meditation, then it's not meditation yet. It's not the experience yet. It's a mental experience. Well, I guess you could say that's an experience, but it's just meant on the mental level.
Yeah. Yes. And what I
Whereas
was.
what we're talking about is the whole being level, the whole being, the substantive being, the real being that you are is it's absorbing it, taking it in, and knowing it, experiencing it. And once you're in touch with that real being that you are, you will be in touch with the inner knower, whom you can trust absolutely. Because once you know something with the inner knower, you know it to be so.
Right.
It's not
Yes.
a guess, it's not a theory, it's not a belief. You know it is so.
Yes, and what I was going to say about the using the word mindfulness and versus the word experience is, experience to me is such a better word to describe what it is that is going on. Because that word mindful, and I think I've talked about this before, and you even said your mind is full, but to me, I've had this, it's always been in my head and never connected to my body. I think I even explained it one time where I felt like my head was kind of a balloon floating in space, disconnected from my body, right? Because I was so in my head, I wasn't having the experience within my body. But through our conversations and being able to understand this, grow in my understanding of it, I love the word experience because it fully captures what's going on in what we're talking about in these conversations.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Um, so today I wanted to start out by talking about a comment we got from a listener on our last episode. If you haven't listened to our last episode, we were talking about resistances and how we create our own resistances. And that was an excellent conversation, as all of our conversation has been. But we got a comment from a listener, and I want to encourage everybody listening today. If you have comments, if you have questions about anything that we're talking about here, please let us know. I'll provide our email addresses in the show notes, but you're always free to comment on any of our videos on social media or any of our other social media posts, because we really want to hear from you and we really want to be able to answer your questions and help you grow on your journey. So the comment we got was, I noticed that when my pain level is high, I tend to disassociate with everything, including myself. It's truly an unempowering strategy, but it's survival sometimes. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my God. But we just laid the groundwork to the answer.
Mm-hmm.
The unempowered state, that's a good observation. It is the most unempowered state you can give yourself because you leave yourself out of the equation.
Right.
That's what the person is saying. That she goes, is it a she or he?
I'm not sure which.
Yeah, so the person goes, uh, it's like deserting himself, herself, themselves, deserting themselves uh, when there is a challenge or a difficulty, right?
Right.
And that's when you always need To be empowered, you need to be in touch with the being that you are, not to desert the being that you are. You see, you need to be
Right.
in that experience. And when you're in that experience of the being that you are, no matter what comes to you, you are able to handle it with equanimity. That is
Mm-hmm.
balance. In that lies strength. In that lies security. And that you can even learn to feel certainty of your ability to handle any situation that comes your way. Because the important thing is not the situation, it's the fact that you are in the experience of the most important thing that you're in this life for.
Mm-hmm.
Which the
Mm-hmm.
most important thing is for you to experience yourself in this life.
Right.
That's what this life is for.
Right. And so pain, I could feel for this person in this comment, because pain is, to me, when I've experienced pain in my own life, whether it be physical or my own self-imposed mental pain, experiencing pain is not something most people are used to. We're taught as from young ages, and it's common to run from the pain, and that can be done in many ways, right? Through medication, through drugs or alcohol, or many other things. And so being in physical pain and experiencing yourself I think probably can be very difficult the first time you do it, let's say. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean by experiencing pain and being within yourself, and that's where the difficulty lies.
What I mean is, if you're in, let's say you have a chronic pain, I don't know, let's say you have something like
I
migraines, let's
understand.
say. Yeah.
Yeah. But when you're, okay, so you have an option to either escape from yourself as if thereby you could escape feeling the pain so strongly.
Right. Right.
But that doesn't work. It never works.
Right.
You might try to dull the pain with alcohol or drugs or things like that. And then you can assess, how is that working for
Right.
me?
Mm-hmm.
And probably you'll come to the answer, ultimately not.
Right.
Okay? So then the only choice you have left is to let yourself be in the experience of you, the being that you are, being right now, experiencing this moment of being, followed by the next and the next. See what happens? Your focus goes to that, not to the experience of the pain.
Yes, I see. Mm-hmm.
But then you insist, oh no, but what if the pain is so intense? Well, the same thing applies. By focusing on the intensity of the pain, that's all you're then aware of.
Right. Right.
Or denying the pain doesn't work either. Or covering up the pain ultimately doesn't work either. So again, you're left with the option, instead of focusing on the experience of the intensity of this pain, let me focus on the experience that I am. So I'm experiencing that, I'm focusing on that, and little by little, the focus becomes so strong that the focus on the pain is removed.
I
Right?
see.
Doesn't that
Yes,
make sense?
it does make sense. And I'm
So
thinking if
that, excuse me, Sloane, that's again, in order to get this, you need to go along in your
yes,
experience of that. Even if you're not having the pain, you can imagine in your experience if you had pain and you focus on that and how that
yes,
strengthens the experience of the pain. Whereas
yes.
when you focus on being and the power of being, then you strengthen the experience of that.
Can we help the listeners a little bit with some of the, maybe shifting their thoughts if they're in a situation like this with pain? Because I can imagine if someone has been in chronic pain and they want to do this, they want to shift into something different and focus on themselves. The mind will probably, I'm guessing for most people, be on autopilot of the pain. This pain is so intense. This pain hurts so bad. Why do I have this pain? Right. Could you help the listeners maybe with some reframing of being able to focus on their own being instead of focusing on the pain?
So what you're saying is, in that case that you're stating, the person is not in control of their mind.
It could
And
be, yes.
that would be the common situation.
Right.
The pain is so intense. Well, it's not because the pain is so intense. It's because you have not cultivated a relationship of your mind where you're in charge and have the mind working for you.
Yes.
If you had cultivated that, and it doesn't have to be cultivated just because of pain or so.
Right.
It can be cultivated all the time to have your mind placed where you decide it to be, not going from object to object, situation to situation all over the place and leaving you behind.
Right. What I love about that is taking that control back, that reminder, that constant reminder to ourselves of taking the control back. I focus my mind. My mind goes in the direction I want it to go.
Right. And that taking the control back is something that you have to exercise, that you have to practice, and you have to know what to do about that. That's why I call this approach that I'm teaching is called the Expert in Life program. So it's an expert in life approach. As an expert in life, you're in charge of your mind. You understand your mind. You are able to have your mind feel very secure and pleasured by finally doing what it is designed for. So then the mind feels at peace and it feels good because it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yes. Yes. I love it. I can feel that relief in my own body as we're talking about this, because I'm thinking about this and talking through it. I was putting myself in the position of, just thinking what it would feel like. And that reminder of bringing the control back to us, especially with anything. If pain is the example right now, but we often it's so, for many people, and I've heard this throughout the years on the show and friends I've talked to, we forget how much power we have. And that's something I talk about a lot on the show. And it's a constant reminder, even to my own self. We forget how much power we have, but we have the power. We get to direct our mind. We get to be in our body and experience our body. And end of story. That's once you make that decision, once you come to that realization.
Sloane, I've meant to say this to you before. It's not just being in the body. The body is just one facet of us, just like the mind is, and the feelings and the emotions and the senses. They're all our instruments.
Right.
What I always say, but there is somebody in there. That's the you, that's the energy, that's the power of being that I'm talking about. That is your real identity. That's who you really are,
Yes. Yeah.
When you're in touch with that, then your mind will work for you and be in a harmonious relationship with you. And the same thing for the feelings and the emotions and the senses. Look, how few people know about their feelings.
Right.
And about their emotions.
Right.
They might have some idea of sensual pursuits and delights or lacks, but still not really be in touch with the senses functioning other than getting the results of when they have lack or whatever,
Right. Yes. Yeah, this was a great question. So I want to thank the listener who made this comment, and I want to encourage everyone else to keep your comments coming. Questions, comments, we're always open for them. So again, I mentioned earlier, you can comment on any of our social media, or I'll put our email addresses in the show notes if you would prefer to send us an email, and we'll do our best to answer your question on the next show.
Well, let me just mention something about that I consider really important.
Sure.
What you're just talking about is, like, with their comments, with listeners' comments and so on, it's a way of participating,
right?
Not just being a listener, not just having words, but engaging in the action of participation.
Right.
So much of the time, we keep it all in the mind level. Well, I have these questions, I have these thoughts, I have these ideas, and they usually not go very far.
Right.
Until you take actions, until you inform yourself to the ultimate degree and then act upon that,
Right.
do you have consequences that are beneficial to you.
Right. Yes, which leads right into our topic for this week of creating what you speak. Obviously that is the title of the podcast. I came up with that. It's been 5 years ago now, because it was so important for me the changes I had been through in my life were just as you had talked about. There were things I wanted. There were different things that changes that I made within, but the action part, pulling that all together and being able to act on it. Once I saw what I could do, once I saw my own power, once I experienced me in that way, my life has never been the same. Never been the same.
Right. That's why I like the subtitle of your show so much, creating what you speak. Because I mean, I work like with students and people in therapy all the time. And I always end up saying, what we say is only valuable when we use that as guides to our actions.
Right.
But if we just talk about it, it's worthless. And everybody can know about that, because we sure know how quickly we forget things.
Right.
That we mentally understood.
Right.
But we forget.
Right.
So they don't really give us any benefit.
Mm-hmm.
All the knowledge in the world is worthless unless you have it inform your actions and inspire and direct your actions.
It reminds me of I don't know. There's several, when people talk about doing something or waiting for something to happen, right? And the joke was always like somebody who wants a relationship, the man or the woman isn't just going to come knocking on your door, right? You have to get out there and do something about it, right? You have to go on dates. Yeah. You have to do things to meet people, whatever it might be. And that's life, right? We can sit and talk and theorize and tell you everything you need to know, but unless you do something and experience it for yourself, you're not finishing the other part of the equation, right? There's the personal responsibility that is required in this life to get what you want. And I think sometimes people are afraid to act. People are afraid to do there's many reasons why people don't act, but the action part is the important part. And that's what we wanted to talk more about today.
Right. I use the example, what if your lover were to say, what if a person who you think you have a relationship with says to you, well, honey, I love you if you want me to.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That is such a passive, it's not taking any responsibility, it's not taking any action. Would that be sufficient to you, I ask, from your lover?
No, absolutely not.
Love relationship.
No, it reminds me of like if you've ever shaken hands with somebody that you were excited to meet and they had like a dead fish handshake, like they barely there was no energy there. That's what that reminds me of. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, but when you relate to yourself in that dead fish way,
right.
And now pause for a moment. Do people do that?
They do.
Relate to themselves that way?
Yes.
Then you ask yourself, do I do that?
Right.
But then it comes, do you tell yourself the truth or do you rationalize?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And rationalizing is just an impolite way of saying lying to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And that I love that dead fish analogy because I'm thinking about my own life here. And if there's areas of my life where maybe I do operate as a dead fish, right? Some areas I'm very action oriented and I can make things move through my actions. But in other areas, I think I do rationalize. And I think I do tell myself these stories for for who know many reasons, right? But that analogy is so true for this topic today. I'm just thinking through it in my own life.
Yeah, yeah. So taking actions, I find, especially taking action according to what is very important to you and your life, is very rare. People
Yeah.
don't, they say that, they go to a therapist for years and years and pay tens of thousands of dollars, and they go to the therapy, and maybe they even go to a really good therapist, but if they don't take action, it's useless.
Right. I was listening to somebody recently talking about, they posed the question, are you is self-help study your life? Like, are you constantly in some sort of self-help study, but you're never actually taking what you learn and applying it, right? You're just always seeking for the next thing that you need to improve yourself, but you're not experiencing life, and you're not doing things and getting out there. And part of life is making mistakes. Part of life is messing up. And I talked a couple of years ago, I gave this example of myself experiencing life when I entered into a dance competition. It was a 6-week competition where every week we learned a new dance, and we only had a week to learn it, and we had to perform in front of people, a lot of people, and you had a different partner every week. So you had to get the different dynamic there. Some weeks were really bad. Some weeks were really awesome. But my whole point in doing that, when I got myself out there and did that, was I wanted to do this. I wanted to experience this. I love dance, and I wanted to do this so much that I took action, and I enrolled, and I did it. And what I found at the end of that, it was so amazing to me how many people said to me, "Oh, I would never do that. I would never do something like that." And how afraid people were to live, how afraid people were to get out there and learn dance moves in front of other people or practice dance moves, right? They were so afraid to do that. That was so surprising to me.
And you gave yourself a challenge, and it had its ups and downs. But after a while, I would bet you even enjoyed the challenge, meeting the challenge of it.
I did. I loved that.
Part of the dynamic and part of the powerful pleasure of it.
I did. I loved the challenge. And I also loved being so proud of myself for getting out there and doing it, because it was way out of my comfort zone. It was tiring, right? There was a lot of practicing while most of us were all still working full-time day jobs, so we had to do this on nights and weekends. But getting up and doing that, I was so proud of myself for doing it, and so proud of everybody that I met too that did it, because everybody was in the same boat. But that's still something that stuck with me even since then. And what I found too, in these kinds of experiences, when we're able to push ourselves, and we're able to, and I went through that, I experienced it, I didn't die, right? I made some mistakes, but I still lived my life. That has helped me do other things that I didn't think I could do, right? Or do other things where I felt like, oh, I might be embarrassed here, or I might mess up in front of people. And then my thought was, well, I danced and I did that, so how could this be any worse? So it was very helpful in that way for me.
Right. And you found out that the concerns were overcome just by yourself doing it. It didn't really matter whether you had a bad partner or a good partner, or whether you messed up or not. It didn't matter. You were engaged in that whole thrust of showing to yourself how you could do what you set out to do.
Right.
That's the wonderful thing. And then you had the experience of that. There was a possibility to constantly experience that you are being, while you were dancing, while you were getting to know the new partner, while anything and everything.
Right. Yes. And that's this topic of creating what you speak, and actually taking the creation part from speaking. Because when I came up with the title, and I was thinking about how I wanted to set up the show, and this has been 5 years ago now, right? But I based that off of what I had did, and this was even prior to dancing, but it was how I had made a decision of what I wanted for my life. I got out of that perpetual seeking self-help and trying to constantly improve myself. And I took action, and I did it. And being able to do that showed it, as you do these things, and you create and you actually take the action, you start to have the experiences where you prove to yourself you can keep doing it. And it gets easier along the way. That's what I found. It gets easier to do things that are out of my comfort zone, or that I think I have no idea if I can do this, but let's try it anyway. It gets easier to do. And so I bring this point up about dance and about, and we're talking about the action part today, because I want to encourage everybody listening. I know everybody listening has something in their mind that they want to take action on, that they've rationalized themselves out of, they've made excuses for, whatever the thing might be that is stopping you. There's something that you want to do.
I just thought of while you were talking, Sloane, wouldn't it be fabulous if out of the thousands of listeners that you have, you would get a few thousand remarks of people reporting how they decided to do something this week and actually did it and carried it through to fruition.
Yes,
Wouldn't that be fabulous?
That would be 100%. And that's what I want to challenge every single person listening today. What is your action? What are you going to do? What are you going to do differently? What are you going to finally allow yourself to do? Because that was the other part for me. I felt like I allowed myself to do this. And we'd love to hear from you. We would love to hear your comments. Like I said, you can email us, you can comment on our social media, but this action part, this is how, if everybody took action in the direction that they wanted something, think how different our lives would be, right? We would all be living completely different lives. We would get out of this little time. I always call it like wrapped up tight in our little box, right? We've got the rope around us so tight, and we're so tightly wound. We need that expansion and that freedom, and taking action on what it is that you want. That's how you get there. That is how you get there. You don't get there by sitting at home, theorizing about it or doing another self-help course.
Yes. I want to give some thoughts on that. When you're thinking of, okay, you can choose a certain action by which you can choose to do, then by which you can prove this to yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So any action, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be world shaking, because our mind often does that. They try to think of something so world shaking that it ends up nothing.
Yes.
Because I can't think of anything world shaking.
Right.
Something very simple but meaningful, not something completely meaningless, something meaningful. And it doesn't have to be super big, but something that you can do and choose to do, and then carry it through, being aware of yourself throughout. That's all. Yes. And then take stock, let's say every evening or so, and then by the end of the week, and let us know about it. But for yourself, most of all, take stock and then acknowledge yourself for it.
Yeah.
This is very important, that you acknowledge yourself for your positive actions.
Yes.
Because the 99% of people are habituated to having, you know how that internal voice is always going on. It's like
I do.
We used to call it a tape going on inside of your head. It's no longer the case, but now it's through the internet or so. You have an internet inside of you.
Right. Yes.
And it's usually critical.
Yes.
And it usually limits you and belittles you and so on. Now, so you acknowledge that you have chosen to do something and you've actually done what you have determined to do. That's a great booster to get you on the path of living in this empowered way.
Yes. And what I found also is that that's the momentum that starts you, because once you do the one thing, it's easier to do the next and the next. It's that momentum that starts to carry you forward. Right.
And take note of how pleasurable that is.
Yes.
How it boosts your self-confidence and your self-respect.
Yes.
Maybe eventually you'll accept yourself unconditionally.
Yes.
That's
that is, and I want to go back. I have a note here. I wanted to read one of your pearls of wisdom. This is back from May 10th. And if you're not familiar with Erhard's Pearls of Wisdom, you can sign up on his website, which I'll link to in the show notes. But he sends out pearls of wisdom every week, little, very short, but very concise little bits of information that I find very helpful. And so this one said, for some, it requires discipline to stop hurting themselves. Give yourself the required attentiveness to enjoy treating yourself with care, respect, and love.
Yeah.
I
So,
thought that fit very well with what we're talking about.
yes, yes. But you see how easy it is to dismiss even the first part, that it takes discipline to stop hurting yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, not me, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you may be in the habit of hurting yourself in subtle ways that
Yes.
you're not even aware of. Oh,
Yes.
people say, oh, it's subtle, though. It doesn't really matter because it's not hitting me over the head. But it's the subtle stuff that goes in so deep. It goes into your very fibers,
I
and
do know.
and
Hmm.
and has its effects there, you know. Um,
Yes.
so be aware of the fact that you, like the majority of people have a tendency to perpetrate hurtful ways upon themselves. They're
Yes.
often ways of thinking about themselves, way of criticizing, way of demeaning themselves, not giving themselves credit, not giving themselves attention. These are all ways of hurting yourself, and there, I bet you could probably come up with many, many more.
Yes. And those, to me, those subtle ways we hurt ourselves are like chipping away at us. They chip away at our very being
Yes,
and all these parts of us. And
very
that
good.
is
Yes,
more, because that happens so gradually over time, you don't even notice it. And then you find yourself in this place of whatever despair you might be in. And it's like, well, how did I get here? Well, maybe it
yeah.
wasn't one event, but it was 5,000 little chips away at yourself.
And it wasn't the outer circumstances and conditions.
Right.
It wasn't because your husband or wife left you. It wasn't because your neighbor said something negative about you. It wasn't because you don't have enough money, or you're not pretty enough, or this or that, or this or that. It's what you've been doing to yourself
Yes.
subtly.
Yes. I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Well, as usual, our conversations go very fast and we're coming up on the end of our time.
No, already?
I know. So before we close out today, we've talked about a lot of things. So we started out the conversation talking about, one of our listeners sent a comment from our episode on resistances. So we talked a lot about, and this particular one was on pain and disassociation. And so we've talked through that. And again, I want to encourage everyone listening, questions, comments, please send them to us via email or via our social media. But then we also got into the real topic today of creating what you speak, which obviously is the title of the show. And I'll give my closing thoughts, and Erhard, I'll turn it over to you for your closing thoughts. To me, creating what you speak, in my intent for the show, was taking the thoughts and putting them into action, putting them into, again, as I've said several times, but I don't know how else to say it in a better way. No more theorizing, no more constantly living in self-help, waiting for your life to begin. That was one thing I felt.
Fantasizing, it's called. Fantasizing.
Yes, fantasizing. And yes, that's the best way to describe it. And I felt like when I was going through that I was living my life on the sidelines. Like I was watching everybody else live theirs, but I was on the sidelines. So the action is key. The action is key. And I'll just share from my own experience. It's not as scary as it seems. You don't have to start out with these major, huge things. You can start out with small, meaningful things to you and work your way up. But I think you'll find once you start and do these small incremental things that are meaningful to you, that you'll build the momentum that is going to make it easier for you to continue to do these things and take action on the things that are important for you.
So let me just insert this, so that eventually that's your way of being.
Yes.
You will automatically express those things that you know through your life, through your actions.
Yes. And I will say, I have had times where that is my state of being. It continues to grow as I grow, but that became my state of being. And I'll find sometimes I'll talk to people who are not in that space, like maybe old friends that I haven't talked to for a while, or whoever it might be. And I find myself looking back at the old way that I used to be, but then also I think, oh, wow, that person is still there. That's where they are. That's still where they are. And I look and I see how far I've come. And again, another moment of being proud of yourself, because you will experience that as you go through this, and it becomes who you are. It just becomes who you are. You will, you'll experience these changes, and it's important to recognize that as you see that in
Right.
yourself.
Right. That's very true, and a very important point, that it is important to recognize, to acknowledge it, to give yourself credit for it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
since you're always talking to yourself, you might as well start talking kindly to yourself
Right.
and
Exactly.
positively.
Yes.
You know, who wants to build up more negativity by its repetition?
I
Right?
don't. Not me. I had many years of that, and I'm over that. So, what are your closing thoughts for today, Erhard?
Take action.
Yeah.
So it occurs to me, look, this is recorded, right?
Yes.
And we will have some people listening to this who really take this seriously, because they recognize this has to do with my very fulfillment, my fulfillment in life, my fulfillment of the reason why I am alive, why I'm in this
Right.
life as a human being. I want to fulfill this. They have a sense that there is an importance to their life and to their being.
Yes.
So you have this recorded. If something is said that really got hold of you, listen to it again. And then stop for a moment, stop the recording and sit with that for a few moments. Let it be embedded in you. Let it be impressed, and thereby have the energy inside of you to contribute to your life in your actions.
Yes. Totally agree. Again, Dr. Erhard Vogel has been my guest this week. He is the author of A Dialogue with Death, the Teacher of Life, an ancient story for the modern world. Erhard, again, thank you for joining us this week. We look forward to the next conversation.
It's been wonderful to be with you, Sloane.
You've been listening to the Create What You Speak podcast, brought to you by webtalkradio.net. You can also hear the podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite podcasting platform. I'm Sloane Freemont, and I hope you'll join us for the next episode of the Create What You Speak podcast, where we will continue to free our minds, expand our consciousness, and untangle those thoughts and patterns that keep us from living the life we desire. Check out my website, sloanefremont.com, to learn more.